Namaste Friends, welcome back to the web technology video learning series. So far, we skimmed through various networking aspects of the web, and then we had a somewhat detailed introduction to HTML, different aspects of HTML versions, text, headings, lists, images, tables, and then we concluded our initial analysis of HTML with an introduction to forms. We have held so far that HTML is meant for content, not necessarily for presentation. Most of the cases in the last lessons, we said HTML supports some bit of styling, but you hold on to see until we learn about CSS, right? So today is the day we will start learning about CSS in next few classes, and then see what we can do to styling with CSS and how we can beautify HTML. We are not really beautifying HTML, technically speaking. We are beautifying the presentation and the end user visible rendering. The HTML itself will remain untouched. What is CSS? Let's get some answers. CSS is a short form for Cascading Style Sheets. Okay, Cascading Style Sheets. It's a style sheet language, or it's a declarative syntactic language used for describing the presentation of a web document. So we know what is a web document. A web document is one which is written in a markup language such as HTML. Note the term such as here. The presentation can be done for other languages as well, even though CSS is predominantly used for HTML. Now, why is CSS required? Because HTML, when it was originally created, it was created for having the content, not the presentation. However, over a period of time, more and more tags got added into HTML for presenting, because without any support for presentation, the text will look bland, right? So people wanted to have a better display of their web document. So we started having new tags in HTML that talked about how the page can be presented differently. Over a period of time, that has become cumbersome, right? So that is not the original intent. With CSS, we have a very clear separation between presentation and content. By presentation, we mean how the content is laid out on the screen. What are various colors, what are various fonts, what are backgrounds, and so on and so forth. This is all presentation. The content itself will remain the same. If you are putting a novel in there, the novel remains the same. However, it is presented better. How? Let's look at few examples in next slides. CSS uses declarative syntax for defining styles. It is not a markup language. It is somewhat different from a markup language, but it is a declarative syntax. We'll see in our next lesson what exactly is the declarative syntax for CSS. How do we define styles? Now these styles are typically put in a file, which is a text file, and these files that have the text style definitions are called style sheets. Now the style sheet forms two S's for the acronym CSS. The last part is the first part is the C, which stands for cascading. Now we know what is a style sheet means, because style sheet is essentially a set of styles in a file. What is cascading? Cascading really means you can have multiple style sheets, one working on the top of another. This is cascading. So There can be multiple style sheets which are working together. That is why this is called CSS. Now, what is the one of the advantages that we have with CSS is CSS is designed to be shared across web pages. You have a HTML file, but typically if you are building a website for a company or for a product or for a purpose, there will be hundreds of web pages. We want to have our styles that are uniform and consistent across web pages. So CSS defined styles can be shared across web pages. Likewise, one page can have multiple styles, but only one can be displayed at any point in time. But for example, you can have a style sheet for a display on a screen and another style sheets for the same text to be printed, right? So one style sheet across multiple pages and one web page multiple style sheets, both are possible. Look at this picture to get an understanding of what is CSS and what is content. This is a picture, a cartoon picture that basically says the same boy or an young adult trying to, let's say, participate in a fashion show or something. His mother, the boy's mother or the boy's parents, have basically put different clothes for the boy at different times for different competitions. Whether it is a businessman or a police person or a doctor or a player or whatever. You see, the same boy is styled differently by having different clothes or styling different styles. Like how the same boy can be made to look different by appropriately styling him, one HTML document can be made to look differently by using different style sheets. The style sheets in this example are like the clothes that the boy is wearing. Okay, so your HTML is the boy with the physical form, and the style sheets are the clothing in this example. We really know that the boy is different from the clothes, right? And should be. Likewise, the content, which is HTML, should ideally be different from how it is to be presented. So that's an example. Is it really feasible? Let's look at an example. On the screen, you have one web page rendered using 4 different style sheets. Can you believe that it's the same web page, no change in HTML, but rendered using different style sheets? That is the power of CSS. Now you can see how one boy with different clothes example can be applied to HTML. Maybe you can find similarities in the boy in the previous picture, but here these are all looking very different, but technically it's the same HTML file and different style sheets. In fact, these are screenshots of a website called CSS Zen Garden, whose purpose is essentially to bring out the power of CSS. We don't really have to go into details of how this is done. However, this should give you an indication of the power of CSS in terms of what it can do for presentation. I suggest you go to this website when you have some time and try to appreciate the difference or the separation of presentation and the content. The same content presented differently. in this on this website and on your screen. So that is what CSS can do. Now, okay, we don't really want to have so much of a difference, but then why do we want to use CSS for? Right. The first example, first advantage, CSS saves time. If you are building a website that has 100 pages, there is every chance, and most of the time it is preferred, that the website looks consistent and uniform, which means that the same page, all pages should look similar with different content. The presentation should be very similar. So that is where CSS comes into play. One style sheet we define, and that can be reused across the entire website. There can still be some web pages which will be having their own styles. CSS does not prohibit it. Therefore, the styling is done only once, whereas content is developed as many times as many pages are there, which is natural. So CSS saves time because we are not doing the styling for every page individually. CSS eases maintenance. Let's continue the example of one website having 100 web pages. Right. Now, always the comparison is, what if I am not using CSS but I am using just HTML for styling also? Because I can change colors, fonts, and if we put pictures, everything with HTML also. I know I am mixing up presentation and content, but that is a technical possibility. So then why should we use the CSS? That's a question we are trying to answer. If you are not using CSS, then, and you have developed all the 100 web pages, you are developing for a customer, you went to the customer and showed all the web pages. Customer said very good, he liked it, but says, instead of this pale grey color as a background for these areas, can you make it pale green? Now, how many places do we have to make modifications if you are not using CSS? You have to touch literally every single file. If you are using CSS, because the styling is different or presentation is separated from content, you only need to make modification in one place. So that is why CSS eases maintenance. We don't have to do it multiple places. CSS also makes web pages load faster. Why? Back to the same example. If we have 100 web pages and there are different styles and colors and fonts for different elements, headings are different, paragraphs are different, quotations are different, if we don't use CSS, then every element in every web page has all the styling details, which means each page is bulkier, right? If you are having a if you are using CSS, then because the styling is separated and moved into a separate style sheet, the web pages are smaller in content and size. Therefore, they can be loaded faster. That is why using CSS, web pages are loaded faster. Obviously, we have been talking, what if I don't use CSS? Can I do? Why not that with pure HTML? The fundamental reason why CSS is better, or one of the main reasons, is CSS allows us to do too many things that HTML does not have support for. So the CSS has superior styling. Now with CSS, when HTML was invented or created, there were not too many screen sizes. Most of the time the web pages were shown on the desktop monitors only, but now we have tablets, cell phones, laptops, and then desktop monitors. They have not gone away. CSS, now if you are designing a web page, then we want it to look identically or adapt to the screen size. HTML doesn't make it easy. it is very difficult to do if we are using pure HTML for styling. CSS makes it easier to support different screen sizes. We'll see how that is in a later class. Now, everything that is good also comes with a catch. There are few things that we should remember that are sometimes called as a disadvantages of CSS, whatever. CSS, even though we have not talked about it so far, is not one standard. CSS has grown through different versions over a period of time. The very first version of CSS standard was CSS1. This CSS2 came along, and now the latest standard is CSS3. Not all browsers support all aspects of CSS. This has been a major pain for the web developers. I want to use this feature of CSS. It works well across 4 browsers, does not work on the 5th browser. That's a problem, right? Over a period of time, the client or browser developing companies have tried to make the support uniform and so on and so forth. So this problem is not so much as it was earlier, but still you will still find that the non-uniform CSS support every now and then rakes up its head. Some feature that we really want to use that is not supported on a particular browser. So this is something that we have to be aware and wary about. The other part is, okay, if I am using only HTML for both styling and presentation, I only have to learn one language. But if I am using CSS for styling, for all the advantages that we have discussed, I have to learn a new language. Because HTML is a markup language, CSS is a declarative syntax. So I have to learn a new language to be able to do styling. This is a disadvantage because of the time that is involved in learning a new language and making the best out of it. Okay, so that's the introduction that we have for CSS. We learned what is CSS. Try to look at few examples. We have understood the advantages and we have discussed the few disadvantages. In next class, we'll try to get into the syntax and then see how to